The second my mom smirked and said, "We already made a copy of your apartment key for your sister," something in me just snapped. That's when it clicked. My missing spare key hadn't been lost. It had been stolen. And before I could even think, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Then you should probably prepare for prison too." I'm 29 and honestly, I'm still shaking while writing this. It's been about 3 hours since I got home from changing every lock in my apartment, and I still can't calm down enough to think straight. Part of me feels insane for how angry I am. The other part thinks I'm underreacting. Maybe writing this out will help. For context, I've been on my own since I was 22. I'm a software engineer and everything I have, I built myself. 2 years ago, after years of 80-hour crunch weeks, surviving on cheap noodles, and putting basically every spare dollar into savings, I bought my apartment. It's not some luxury penthouse or anything. It's a modest 2-bedroom condo just outside downtown Seattle. But it's mine. Every square foot of it exists because I sacrificed for it. That matters. My younger sister Claire is 27. She's what people politely call free-spirited. What that actually means is she spent most of her adult life bouncing between half-finished plans while my parents cheer her on like she's some misunderstood genius waiting for her big break. Meanwhile, I've always been the responsible one, which apparently translates to less deserving of help. When I worked my way through community college before transferring to a state university, I was told it would build character. When Claire got accepted to a private liberal arts school for a communications degree, my parents paid every cent. When she graduated, they bought her a new SUV. When she couldn't find work in her field, they let her move home rent-free, until she figured things out. When she eventually landed a part-time retail job at some boutique, they acted like she'd personally solved the economy. I never hated her for any of that. What I hated was the expectation that because I make decent money now, I should automatically become her backup plan. For years it's been the same thing. You're doing so well. You don't have kids. Family helps family. Translation: Claire needs something, so you should give it to her. 3 weeks ago, her latest living arrangement imploded. She'd been staying with her boyfriend, Ryan, until she found out he'd been cheating on her. Messy breakup, dramatic fallout, the usual. Instead of moving back in with our parents, she suddenly decided she needed real independence, and started apartment hunting. The problem? A part-time boutique paycheck doesn't exactly stretch far in Seattle. So 2 weeks ago, my parents called with what they clearly thought was the perfect solution. Claire would move into my apartment for a little while, until she found a place. I shut that down immediately. Absolutely not. I work from home 3 days a week. My apartment is my safe zone. Everything has its place. I keep things quiet, clean, predictable. Claire is the exact opposite. The last time she stayed over for just one weekend, she demolished an entire week of my meal prep, left foundation smeared across my bathroom counter, and invited friends over who stayed laughing and drinking until nearly 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. So no. Hard no. I said it clearly, repeatedly. I even offered alternatives. I told them I'd help her search for affordable apartments. I offered to loan her money for a deposit, with an actual written repayment agreement. Apparently that wasn't supportive enough. My parents kept insisting I was being selfish. For reference, my apartment has 2 bedrooms. But the second room isn't some guest suite sitting empty. It's my office. That room is where I work. It's filled with expensive equipment, multiple monitors, servers, and thousands of dollars of hardware I need for my job. But according to my parents, it was just extra space. Then yesterday happened. I got back from the gym around 7. The second I opened my front door, I knew something was wrong. There were boxes everywhere. Suitcases stacked by the couch. And sitting cross-legged in the middle of my living room, casually unpacking throw pillows like she owned the place, was Claire. My parents were there too, hauling in more of her stuff like this had all been planned weeks ago. For a second, I genuinely thought I'd walked into the wrong apartment. Then my mom looked up and smiled. Not nervous. Not apologetic. Smug. Like she'd won something. We knew once you saw how much your sister needed this, you'd come around. My dad barely looked up from carrying another box. Don't make this a whole thing, Evan. It's temporary. And Claire? She laughed and said, relax. This place desperately needs some personality anyway. It'll be fun living together. We can finally bond like actual siblings. That was the moment I realized they hadn't convinced me. They'd never intended to. And then my mother said the words that made my stomach drop. We already made copies of your spare key, so there's no point fighting this. That's when I understood exactly where my missing key had gone. And that's when everything got so much worse. It got worse. Way worse. Claire had already started settling in. Her makeup bag was spread across my bathroom counter like she'd lived there for months. Her clothes were hanging inside my office closet, right next to the server rack I use for work. There was even one of her stupid decorative candles sitting on my desk. That's when the shock finally turned into anger. Pure white-hot anger. I looked at all three of them and said as calmly as I could, "Get out. Right now." My mom's face instantly shifted into that wounded expression she always uses when she wants to guilt-trip me. "Evan, don't be cruel. Your sister is going through a difficult time." My dad crossed his arms and gave me that same authoritarian look he used when I was 16. "This is happening whether you like it or not. Stop being dramatic." And Claire? She actually started crying. Real tears. Like somehow she was the victim here. "Why are you being so mean?" she said. "I literally have nowhere else to go." And then my mother dropped the sentence that sent me into a blind rage. She smiled, actually smiled, and said, "It doesn't really matter what you want. We already had copies of your key made for Claire. She's family. This is happening." For a second I couldn't even process what she'd said. Then it hit me. My missing spare key. A few weeks earlier, I'd noticed one of my backup keys was gone from the kitchen drawer where I kept it for emergencies. I'd assumed I'd misplaced it. I hadn't. They'd taken it. During their last visit, one of them had gone into my kitchen, stolen my key, copied it, and then put the original back so I wouldn't notice. They planned this. They knew I'd said no. They just decided my answer didn't matter. Something in me snapped. I told them they had 10 minutes to get every single box out of my apartment or I was calling the police. My dad actually laughed. A smug little laugh. Like I was bluffing. "Come on, Evan," he said. "You're not going to call the cops on your own family." So I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Right in front of them. The second they heard me report an active break-in and unauthorized entry, panic hit the room. That smug confidence disappeared fast. Suddenly everyone was scrambling. Claire was shoving clothes back into suitcases. My dad was hauling boxes toward the door. My mom burst into dramatic tears, sobbing about how I was tearing this family apart. By the time the officers arrived, they were halfway through loading Claire's stuff back into their SUV. I explained everything. The copied key. The forced move-in attempt. The fact that I had explicitly told them no multiple times. The officers were sympathetic, but legally there wasn't much they could do in that moment. Since they had entered using a real key, even if obtained without permission, it was murky enough that they treated it as a civil issue. Still, they made one thing crystal clear. My family was to leave immediately and not return without my direct permission. One officer pulled me aside before leaving and said, "Change your locks tonight. Install cameras. Document everything." That's exactly what I did. I called an emergency locksmith that same night. Every lock was replaced. Front door. Patio access. Window locks. Everything. $400 gone in an hour. Worth every cent. The next morning, I installed cameras covering every entrance and a Ring doorbell with motion alerts. Then I contacted building management and explicitly revoked any access privileges my family might try to claim. I made it very clear. Under no circumstances were they to be let into the building or my unit for any reason. Then I sent one final group text. A photo of the new locks. And one message. "I have changed every lock and installed security cameras. Any attempt to enter my apartment without my direct permission will be treated as trespassing and met with legal action. If necessary, I will seek restraining orders." Then I added, "What you did was not helping family. It was violating my privacy, my property, and my autonomy as an adult. My name is on the deed. You do not get to decide who lives here." To Claire I wrote, "I'm sorry your relationship fell apart, but that does not entitle you to my home." To my parents, "Your favoritism and manipulation have gone too far. Until you can acknowledge what you did and apologize, we have nothing to discuss." The responses came almost instantly. Predictable, honestly. My mom called sobbing about how cruel I was and how family doesn't treat each other like this. My dad sent a massive text about disappointment and how he'd raised me better than this. Claire made a Facebook post about people who forget where they came from the second they get successful. The comments were full of sympathy. People calling her brave. People saying family betrayal hurts the most. None of them knew the truth. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Because I was done. Done being the reliable son they used whenever Claire needed rescuing. Done sacrificing my peace because family comes first. Done pretending their manipulation was normal. I thought changing the locks would end it. I was very, very wrong. I was done. Done with the guilt trips. Done with the manipulation. Done letting family be their excuse for bulldozing every boundary I ever set. Apparently, my parents took that personally. Because within hours, my phone turned into a war zone. Calls, texts, voicemails, Facebook messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. My parents had already started their smear campaign. According to the version they were telling everyone, I'd thrown my poor sister onto the street, because I'd become cold and selfish after making money. Apparently I was now the heartless villain who'd abandoned family the second life got comfortable. My Aunt Karen texted, "Your parents were only trying to help Claire. You're acting like they committed a crime." And I just stared at my phone thinking, yes, that's literally what they did. Breaking into someone's home and trying to move another person in without consent is not some quirky family misunderstanding. It's trespassing, possibly breaking and entering. The law doesn't suddenly stop applying because you share DNA. Eventually I muted my phone and set an automatic response telling people I was stepping away from family drama and would respond when I felt ready. The only person who actually had my back was my cousin Derek. And honestly, his support mattered more than he probably realizes. A few years ago, his parents had tried forcing his younger brother into his house under almost identical circumstances. He shut it down too. He told me something I've been repeating to myself ever since. The only reason they're this angry is because your boundaries are working. I wanted to believe him. But sitting alone in my apartment that night, staring at those brand new locks, I felt awful. Not guilty exactly. Just drained. There's this weird grief that comes with realizing your own family sees your boundaries as betrayal. Part of me wondered if maybe I'd overreacted. Then I pictured Claire unpacking in my living room like she owned the place. And the anger came right back. This was never about helping her. I offered help. Real help. Apartment hunting. A loan for a deposit. Actual solutions. That wasn't what they wanted. What they wanted was control. And they were furious they couldn't force it. The threats started almost immediately. My mom texted that I was no longer welcome at Thanksgiving unless I apologized to Claire. My dad said he was considering removing me from his will. That one almost made me laugh. You can't threaten someone with losing something they never expected to have. Claire kept posting vague little Facebook memes about fake family and people forgetting where they came from. It was pathetic. But I held my ground. This was my line. My hill to die on. You don't get to invade someone's home and then act shocked when they defend it. You don't get to violate clear boundaries and then play victim when there are consequences. When half your family treats you like a monster, you start questioning yourself. I remember actually sitting there wondering, am I somehow the asshole here? Then 5 days later things escalated. Fast. And in a way I honestly never saw coming. I'm updating because I need this documented somewhere. And because if I don't write it down, I'm going to start feeling crazy. Remember those security cameras I installed? Best money I've ever spent. 2 days after my original post, I was working from home when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I almost ignored it. Then I checked the feed. And my stomach dropped. Claire was standing outside my front door. And next to her was a locksmith. For a second I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. Then I saw her pointing at the lock and talking to him. I started screen recording immediately and called 911. Then I walked to the door without opening it and shouted, "Claire, you're on camera. Leave right now or I'm pressing charges." The locksmith froze. He looked confused and asked Claire, "Ma'am, is this your residence?" And without missing a beat, she said, "Yes. My roommate locked me out after an argument." I actually couldn't believe what I was hearing. I cracked the door open just enough to show the locksmith my ID and lease agreement. Then I said, "This is my apartment. My name is the only one on the lease. She has never lived here. She's my sister and she's trying to break into my home." The guy's entire face changed. Immediate panic. He apologized at least 3 times and practically sprinted for the elevator. Claire chased after him, begging him to come back. He didn't. And that's when she completely lost it. She started screaming. Full-on meltdown in the hallway. Tears. Yelling. Calling me selfish, cruel, heartless. Saying I was ruining her life. That she had nowhere else to go. That I was a terrible brother. Then she sat down directly in front of my door. Crossed her arms. And said she wasn't leaving until I let her in. I gave her one warning. Just one. Then I called the police. And when the officers arrived, the same 2 from before, unbelievably, Claire actually tried to tell them this was a roommate dispute and I'd illegally locked her out. And that's when things got even crazier. She planted herself right in front of my door like a toddler refusing to leave a toy store. Arms crossed. Legs stretched out across the hallway. And with this weird, smug little smile she said, I'm not leaving until you let me in. I gave her one warning. Just one. Claire, leave now or I'm calling the police. She rolled her eyes. Didn't move. So I called. And somehow, by pure coincidence, the same two officers from the first incident showed up. The second Claire saw them, she switched instantly into victim mode. Tears. Shaky voice. That whole performance she's apparently spent her life perfecting. She told them this was just a roommate dispute and that I'd illegally locked her out after an argument. If I hadn't had everything documented, I almost would have admired the confidence. But I did have everything. The lease. The doorbell footage. The first police report. The locksmith recording. The officers barely needed 5 minutes. One of them looked her dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, you do not live here. This is trespassing. If you come back again, you will be arrested." That finally got her to move. She stormed off sobbing dramatically down the hall. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. An hour later, my parents showed up. To their credit, they didn't try forcing their way inside this time. Apparently they'd learned at least one lesson. Instead, they stood outside my door for nearly 20 minutes while my camera recorded every second. My mom started first, knocking softly like she was some concerned stranger. "Evan, please open the door. You're destroying this family." Then she launched into this whole performance about how Claire was alone in a hotel because of me. Complete lie, by the way. Derek later confirmed Claire was already back at their house. Then came the guilt. Heavy, theatrical guilt. We never thought we'd raise such a cold-hearted son. And when that didn't work, my dad took his turn. His voice was ice-cold through the door. "You're choosing your precious apartment over your family." Then he added, "When your mother and I are gone someday, this is what you'll remember. And you'll regret it." That one actually made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was so absurdly manipulative that it crossed into parody. I recorded every word. Every accusation. Every guilt trip. Every attempt to emotionally corner me. And the second they finally left, I forwarded everything to my friend Daniel. He's an attorney. By the next morning, he drafted a formal cease and desist letter. Clean. Professional. Brutal. It stated that any further harassment, attempted entry, or unwanted contact would result in immediate legal action. I had it sent that afternoon. That's when the family meltdown went nuclear. Apparently my parents took the legal letter personally. Which meant the extended family got activated like some kind of weird flying monkey bat signal. My phone exploded. Relatives I hadn't heard from in literal years suddenly felt qualified to weigh in. My Aunt Karen called screaming about family values. My Uncle David sent a 6-paragraph email about how success had made me arrogant. Random cousins were flooding Claire's Facebook comments, calling me selfish and heartless. And Claire herself posted a photo of herself crying with the caption, "When your own brother treats you worse than strangers do." For a few hours the sympathy poured in. Then Derek stepped in. And honestly, that man deserves sainthood. He commented directly under her post with screenshots from my security footage. Claire standing there with the locksmith. My parents harassing me at my door. The time-stamped footage of the attempted forced entry. And he wrote, "Maybe tell the whole story, Claire. Breaking into someone's home isn't asking for help." Absolute chaos. The comments exploded. Some family members doubled down, saying I still should have let her stay because family is family. Others started asking uncomfortable questions. A few privately messaged me to apologize for jumping to conclusions and asked for my side. For the first time, the narrative was cracking. That's when I got serious. I created a folder and started documenting everything. Texts, emails, voicemails, social media posts, camera footage, police reports. Every single interaction. Daniel reviewed it all and told me something that made my stomach drop. "You have enough for restraining orders." Easily. And honestly, I was still debating it. Until yesterday. That was the final straw. I got called into HR at work. The second I walked in, I knew something was wrong. My manager looked uncomfortable. HR looked concerned. And then they explained. My mother had somehow gotten the company's main number and called pretending she was deeply worried about my mental health. She told them I'd become unstable, paranoid, that I was isolating myself from family and might be a danger to myself, or other people. She actually tried to frame me as mentally unwell so my workplace would intervene. I just sat there for a second in complete disbelief. Thankfully, my boss knows me well enough to recognize obvious manipulation. Once I showed them the documentation, they immediately understood what was happening. They were horrified, and weirdly incredibly supportive. But walking out of that meeting, something inside me shifted. Whatever guilt I had left disappeared. This wasn't family concern. This was harassment. Calculated, escalating harassment. And if they were willing to come after my career, there was no line they wouldn't cross. So I stopped hesitating. That afternoon I filed restraining orders against all three of them. Claire, my mother, my father. Then I sent one final message to the extended family. A full timeline, screenshots, police reports, security footage, and one sentence at the end. Anyone who continues harassing me on their behalf will be permanently cut off. That quieted most of them fast. The flying monkeys scattered. A few still send passive-aggressive little comments here and there. But mostly, silence. And honestly, after everything, that silence feels incredible. Still, deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not with people this entitled. And unfortunately, I was right. Things somehow got even more ridiculous. Claire launched a GoFundMe. No, seriously. She titled it something like Emergency Housing Support After Family Betrayal and filled it with this dramatic story about how her unstable brother had thrown her onto the street with nowhere to go. It raised about $200, mostly from boutique coworkers and random friends who had no idea what actually happened. Honestly, that part almost made me laugh. Almost. Because behind all the absurdity, this whole thing was wrecking me. I wasn't sleeping. Every phone notification made my heart jump. I kept checking the cameras even when there were no alerts, just waiting for the next escalation. I had to take time off work to deal with lawyers, documentation, and police reports. For a while, I kept asking myself if I'd somehow caused this. If maybe I should have handled it differently. That's why I finally started therapy. And honestly, that decision probably saved me. After hearing everything, my therapist looked at me and said, "You're describing a textbook narcissistic family system." She explained that people like my parents often assign roles. There's usually a golden child who can do no wrong. And then there's the scapegoat. The one expected to absorb pressure, sacrifice endlessly, and stay quiet about it. The second that person starts setting boundaries, the system panics. It escalates. Because control is slipping. Hearing that was weirdly validating. For the first time, I stopped wondering if I was cruel. I wasn't. I was protecting myself. And apparently they couldn't stand that. I'd planned to update after the restraining order hearing. I didn't expect the insanity that happened before it. About 2 weeks after filing, everything went quiet. No calls. No texts. No social media jabs. Nothing. And for a second I actually thought maybe they'd finally accepted reality. I should have known better. They weren't done. They were regrouping. The first move came when Claire showed up at my office building. Thank God I'd warned security. They refused to let her inside. So what did she do? She stood outside for 2 straight hours holding a giant handwritten sign that said, "My brother Evan works here and made me homeless." I wish I were joking. Coworkers saw it. Clients walking in saw it. People took pictures. Security finally called the police and she was formally warned for harassment. When my company found out, they were incredible. HR documented everything. Legal offered support if I needed it. And my boss personally told me, "Whatever this is, we've got your back." I nearly cried hearing that. Then my parents tried a different strategy. Welfare checks. 3 times in 1 week. They kept calling the police claiming they were deeply concerned about my mental health and feared I might hurt myself. Each time officers showed up, I calmly explained the situation and showed them my documentation folder. By the 3rd visit, one officer actually sighed and said, "You need to expedite those restraining orders. This is harassment." And then came the night everything crossed from harassment into criminal. 4 days before the hearing. 3 in the morning. I woke up to my security alarm screaming. That sound is something I'll never forget. Pure panic. Half asleep, I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed. And there she was, Claire, on the fire escape outside my bedroom window, holding a crowbar, actually trying to pry the window open. For a second, my brain literally refused to process what I was seeing. It looked unreal, like some bad movie. Then survival mode kicked in. I called 911 immediately. This time there was no ambiguity. No gray area. No fake roommate story. The police arrived within minutes. And Claire was arrested on the spot. Attempted breaking and entering. Criminal trespassing. Possession of burglary tools. She spent the night in jail before my parents bailed her out the next morning. You'd think that would finally force reality to hit them. It didn't. Because apparently their next move was suing me. The day after Claire got arrested, I received a formal letter from some attorney I'd never heard of. The claims were absurd. They accused me of emotional distress. defamation for sharing security footage. And somehow, this was my favorite part, they claimed I owed Claire financial compensation for illegally evicting her from an apartment she had never lived in. I actually laughed reading it. Then I looked up the lawyer. Turns out he'd already been disciplined by the state bar twice. That explained a lot. I forwarded everything to Derek's attorney friend, Marcus, who officially agreed to represent me pro bono. His response was beautiful. Professional, concise, and absolutely devastating. He essentially told their lawyer the claims were frivolous, baseless, and that continuing harassment would only strengthen my restraining order case. He also included one line I'll probably frame someday. Truthful documentation of criminal conduct is evidence, not defamation. Then came the hearing. And somehow, my family managed to turn it into theater. They all showed up. Not just Claire and my parents. Aunts, uncles, cousins, an entire little support squad. And I swear to God they had coordinated outfits. All black. Like they were attending a funeral. It would have been funny if it wasn't so unhinged. Claire took the stand first. And the performance she gave deserved an award. She cried on cue. Voice trembling. Hands shaking dramatically. She told this elaborate story about how I'd promised she could stay with me, then suddenly changed my mind and cruelly abandoned her. She claimed she'd only gone to my window that night because she was desperate to talk things through. Like the crowbar was just some random emotional support accessory. And somehow, it only got crazier from there. When my attorney played the security footage of Claire standing outside my bedroom window with a crowbar in her hands, her explanation was so ridiculous the entire courtroom went quiet. She claimed she'd only been trying to return a tool I'd supposedly loaned her. Even the judge looked stunned for a second. Then things somehow got worse. My mom took the stand and calmly told the court she believed I'd been having some kind of breakdown. She said I'd become paranoid, irrational, and withdrawn from the family for no reason. She even hinted that I might be abusing drugs or dealing with some kind of psychological episode. Hearing her say that, so casually like she genuinely believed it, made my stomach turn. When my lawyer asked why she'd secretly copied my apartment key, she barely hesitated. That's what families do, she said. We were worried about his safety. Like violating my home was some kind of loving parental duty. Then my dad got up and doubled down. He gave this whole speech about family honor and private matters staying private. He acted like I was humiliating everyone by involving the courts instead of handling this like a son should. And then he actually told the judge, with a completely straight face, that as my father, he had every right to access my apartment whenever he felt it was necessary to check on me. The judge stared at him for a second before saying very slowly, "Sir, parenthood does not grant legal access to an adult child's residence." That was probably the first moment I saw genuine panic cross his face. Then it was my turn. And honestly, by that point, I was done being emotional about it. I just laid everything out. The texts, the calls, the copied keys, the security footage, the false wellness checks, Claire showing up with a locksmith, my mother calling my workplace, the attempted break-in, everything. My lawyer had built a clear timeline showing exactly how their behavior escalated every time I enforced a boundary. The judge turned to Claire and asked one simple question. Have you ever legally resided in your brother's apartment? She tried to dodge it. Started rambling about family agreements and implied permission. Eventually she had to admit the truth. No, she had never lived there. Then the judge asked my parents whether they'd copied my spare key without permission. They tried to spin it as concern. But under direct questioning they admitted it. Yes, they had taken my key and copied it without my knowledge. That was it. The judge granted all 3 restraining orders on the spot. 2 years. None of them could come within 500 feet of my apartment or workplace. No direct contact. No indirect contact through relatives. No social media posts about me. Nothing. And the judge made it very clear why. He said their conduct showed a dangerous pattern of escalating entitlement that justified legal protection. The second he said it, the room exploded. My mother started sobbing so loudly the bailiff had to tell her to stop. My father called me a disgrace. Claire screamed that I'd ruined her life and swore I'd regret this. The judge threatened contempt charges if they didn't leave immediately. As they were being escorted out, my aunt snapped, "Hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family." Before I could even respond, Michael stood up behind me and said, "No. They destroyed it when they decided he wasn't allowed to say no." I'll never forget that. That night Facebook turned into a war zone. Claire posted about how the legal system protects abusers and punishes victims. My parents posted vague prayer requests about losing a son to darkness. Half my relatives believed them. Half didn't. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't care. Because I was free. No more surprise visits. No more guilt trips. No more pretending their behavior was normal just because they were family. For the first time ever, my home actually felt like mine. Work was incredible through all of it. My boss offered full remote flexibility if I needed space. HR connected me with counseling services. Even coworkers I barely knew reached out to say they were proud of me. My neighbors offered witness statements if anything happened again. My landlord personally called to assure me my family had been permanently banned from the building. And therapy helped more than I can explain. My therapist called what happened an extinction burst, the escalation people show when control stops working. She told me something that hit hard. You were trained your whole life to believe Claire's comfort mattered more than your autonomy. Breaking that programming felt like withdrawal. And she was right. Even after winning, part of me still felt guilty. Still wondered if maybe I'd gone too far. That guilt faded slowly. But peace replaced it. I changed every emergency contact. Removed my parents from every legal document they'd ever been attached to. Updated my will. Locked down my accounts. Started building a life that didn't include automatic access to me. It was lonely sometimes. Especially around the holidays. But it was a quiet kind of loneliness. The kind that lets you breathe. Final update, 3 months later. I honestly thought this story was over. Then the district attorney called. Claire was being formally charged for the attempted break-in, criminal trespassing, attempted burglary, possession of burglary tools. Apparently she thought the restraining order hearing was the end of it. It wasn't. The footage was too clear. The evidence too strong. Once charges were filed, she lost her boutique job almost immediately. Turns out retail employers aren't thrilled about active burglary cases. My parents hired her another lawyer, but after draining most of their savings fighting the restraining orders, they couldn't afford anyone competent. The trial lasted less than a week. Her defense argued she'd only wanted to talk things through. And yes, her attorney actually claimed the crowbar was for self-defense because she'd felt unsafe outside at night. The jury deliberated for under 2 hours. Guilty on every count. Claire got probation, mandatory therapy, community service, restitution for my locks and security system, and a permanent criminal record. And during sentencing, something unexpected came out. An ex-boyfriend came forward. Apparently she'd done something almost identical after one of their breakups. Tried forcing entry into his apartment while claiming she lived there. My parents had paid him off to avoid charges. That hit me harder than I expected. Because it proved this was never about desperation. It was entitlement. A lifelong pattern everyone had protected. And suddenly people started apologizing. Relatives who'd called me selfish admitted they'd been manipulated. Even Aunt Linda sent a long email saying she'd been wrong. Then yesterday something happened I never thought I'd see. My parents reached out through their attorney. Not to threaten me. Not to guilt me. To request mediation. Apparently court-ordered therapy for Claire and voluntary counseling for them had forced some ugly realizations. The letter admitted everything. The favoritism. The manipulation. The copied keys. The years of treating me like I existed to clean up Claire's messes. It wasn't exactly an apology. But it was the closest thing to accountability I've ever gotten. And weirdly, it didn't feel satisfying. It just made me tired. Because now I have a choice. A real one. 6 months ago, I would have done anything for their approval. Now, I'm asking what's actually best for me. And honestly, I don't know yet. I moved recently. Better job. Better apartment. Full-time doorman security. No one knows the address except Michael. Walking into this place for the first time felt unreal. No history. No anxiety. No memories attached to their control. Just peace. And I've learned something through all this. Family is not ownership. DNA does not erase boundaries. Love does not require surrendering your safety. The people who truly care about you won't punish you for saying no. I lost family through this. But I built something better. Real friendships. Real trust. A chosen family that respects me in ways my own never did. Claire still tells people she was misunderstood. Most don't buy it anymore. Criminal convictions tend to ruin victim narratives. My parents are still in therapy. They've burned through most of their savings. Their daughter has a record. Their son has a restraining order against them. All because they refused to accept one word. No. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they'd respected that boundary from the start. Maybe we'd still have some kind of relationship. Maybe not a healthy one, but something. Instead, they made their choice. And eventually, I made mine. I chose myself. I chose peace. I chose safety. And even after everything, the courts, the lies, the fallout, the loneliness, I'd choose it all again. Tonight I'm sitting in my new apartment. The city lights are pouring through the windows. My phone is silent. No demands. No guilt. No chaos. Just quiet. And sometimes that peace feels so unfamiliar that I still catch myself wondering, AITA for choosing myself over my family?